Welcome everyone to another episode of Prime and Load. In this episode, we're doing something a little different. As some of you might know, March marked 1 full year of Prime and Load. It's something we're really excited about and kind of wanted to take a second and kind of look back on this past year and talk about some of our favorite moments and the community that's grown around the show. This is really exciting for us, and on top of everything, we have just this past week passed 25,000 downloads. So let me be the first to thank all of you for everything you've done and for listening to this incredibly niche, but we hope very exciting show. So thank you for joining us for a year in review. So Alec, do you want to kind of tell us about how this show actually started? What's the origin story? You tell it so well.
So like in 2018 or 2019, I think, Lee reached out to me and said, man, let's do a podcast on 18th century warfare. And at that point, I was getting my PhD and going over to Europe to do sort of archival research. And my response was something like, yeah, man, that sounds awesome. Let's do it. And then I bailed on Lee for like 6 years. And in I suppose it would be late 2024, I had appeared a few times on Zach White's podcast on the Napoleonic Wars, and was talking with a couple of other of the 18th century co-hosts, or co-guests, I guess, for that podcast, and thought, man, there's no reason why we couldn't have one of these for the 18th century. The 18th century is not just like the redheaded stepchild of the Napoleonic Wars. It deserves its own wonderful podcast. And so reached out to a number of folks. I mean, obviously came back to you and said, hey, man, 7 years later, you want to still do that podcast? And you were very gracious that I completely ghosted you for that length of time. And you obviously joined by Andrew. And, you know, what was the first few episodes we did? It was in March on things like, you know, the world of battle and on St. Patrick's Day, like the Irish Regiment episodes, right? So it's been over a year, and it's just, as Andrew said, it's just flown by. It's hard to believe that we are been going for a whole year.
Yeah, and those, believe it or not, are still some of our most popular episodes. The introduction to 18th century warfare, part 1 and 2, still going strong, which is glad to hear it.
I'm intrigued as well, guys. The idea was that obviously you wanted me for me, but you were very keen, I know, both to have a Brit on board. I mean, what was the thinking behind that to make it a transatlantic project?
Well, I mean, you could have two Yanks and it could be a fun podcast, but I guess you help us connect to a like an audience that cares more than just, you know, what size was George Washington's wooden teeth. And that can be something that, you know, is valuable. You know, 18th century warfare, it happens frequently. We tell this in like national stories, right? So, I mean, if you're into 18th century warfare, maybe you love the American riflemen from the War of Independence, or you love the Redcoats at the Battle of Fontenoy, or you are really into like German history and you like the Prussians or something like this. But trying to do a podcast like this, you got to tell the whole story of the 18th century, you know, military history in the Atlantic world, and to do that well, I mean, we need someone over on your side of the water. Right? I mean, certainly you'd agree, right, Andrew? I mean,
you're absolutely, yes, yeah. Certainly, yeah. Royal Britannia, up the British Grenadiers, and all the rest of it.
That's right, absolutely right.
Says the guy who reenacts the Irish pickets and whatnot, right?
Well, yeah. I mean, as I say, you know, I've said before, you spend all week researching the British Army, you get kind of frustrated with it on occasion. It's therapeutic to go shoot at it in a reenactment, guys.
Yeah, there you go. Very healthy way of dealing with academic stress, for sure. What do you guys think has been harder than you might have expected?
Probably getting the audio volume right has been my biggest challenge, right? Because I'm either like really far away or way too loud. That's sort of like been the trouble for me this year, is trying to figure out an audio mix that seems to match well with what our listeners need. I think that's been the most frustrating part of it for me.
Yeah, I would tend to agree. It's tough when we're all in separate places. It's, you know, usually I can just go over and turn a few knobs and it's pretty easy, but just being separated, it makes that part a little tricky. We're definitely moving forward. I think that's something we do have to squarely attack and address. I think we've gotten a lot better, but I agree that's finicky.
Yeah, I think all our listeners are probably aware that I live very close to a traditional British church with traditional British church bells that do bell ringing practice at the same time as we often record. So if you've been hearing straight ringing in the background, really. It's not tinnitus. It's a sound of an English village.
Yeah, there you go. It is very. I like it when you're talking about blood and gore and battle, and then just really nice chimes in the back. It grounds the whole thing. I like it.
I think for me as well, though, the amount of prep time. You think you know a topic, and then you realise you've got to talk about it for 45 minutes and answer questions from you guys. And describing a battle without maps, which I know is something we're working on, but to do that without any visual terms of reference is hard. And similarly with some of the guest episodes, we've had somebody on and they've written a book, and great, I've got a fun book to read as prep, but you've sort of got to gut it and which bits do we want to draw out in the episode and how we're going to lead into this, and it's suddenly a lot more drawn out than just have a nice Sunday afternoon and read this book and then we'll do a recording. You suddenly realise there's rather more to it. Got to be professional about these things.
Yeah, I mean, I changed my answer. I do think the maps piece has been challenging, just because trying to come up with an analogy for Silesia. What I think I ended up saying, a manatee floating through Europe. Yeah.
An upside down manatee.
Yeah, there we go. Yeah. An upside down manatee floating through Europe. Nice. Okay.
Yeah. And was there a moment that in your mind kind of validated this whole project? Was there something that said, oh, hey, now I think this is actually starting to work?
I think for me, the response when we started asking for listener questions, but both that we got some, that we got so many, but that they were so well informed. People have clearly got an interest in. All right, they might want to listen in because they want to polish it and add to it. But we were getting really really sensible, well informed questions, and great. We're making an impact here. We're in touch with a community that's genuinely interested in the sort of stuff that we're all happy to talk about.
Yeah, I agree. I think there was one question we got about the details of the structure and organization of Prussian cavalry, and I read that. I was, wow, all right, that's the nitty gritty for sure.
Yeah, I think for me it was probably encountering people in real life who had listened to the podcast. So at the Society of Military History Conference, or even my students were like, "Oh yeah, I enjoyed the episode." I was like, "Oh wow, it's not just something I do with 3 people in a room. It's something that it's out in the real world. It's kind of crazy thing."
Yeah, I'd have to agree with that. I've encountered a few people who listen and ask questions based on some episodes, and when they talk about something that is related to another episode, and I can tell them, hey, actually, we talked about this or that topic, and then they get excited to go back and listen to that other one, which obviously that's growing our viewership and our downloads and stuff, but it's cool to say that we've got this backlog of information that people are getting value out of. I think that's really, really awesome. Again, 18th century is a very niche topic, but I feel like we're kind of bringing some people who might be interested in other time periods into really showing them, like you said, Alex, this is not the redheaded stepchild of military history. This is an important period, it's been pretty cool. Do you think over this past year there's been anything that has been surprising to you, either about the topics we've covered or just the process of making a podcast?
I guess I would say I'm continually surprised by how big the 18th century is, not just in terms of the geographical places you could go, with Josh Provan, but the wide variety of different contexts, even in one place, chronology, right? I mean, we've had episodes on the 7 Years' War, the War of Austrian Succession, the American War of Independence. I mean, there's a lot to cover. And so that has been, when we started this, I think I had kind of had the viewpoint that you just expressed, Lee, which is man, are we really going to be able to make a go of this? It seems like kind of a niche topic. I mean, does people really want to hear about 18th century warfare? As we've done a whole year, I do kind of feel like, wow, a whole year has gone by and we've barely scratched the surface, and we have so much content. This is like waiting to come with the anniversaries that are coming up this year. It really is like 100 years plus. Obviously we go back in the 17th century a little bit, maybe. 100 years plus of content all over the world. I mean, there's a huge amount of things that we've talked about. I mean, we've not even, and forgive me, we have to edit this if I completely spacing something, but we've not really talked about the War of Spanish Succession in any detail. We've not really talked about the Great Northern War in any detail. I mean, there are huge swaths of the period that this podcast covers that we've not even really reached yet. And so I think it speaks to how big, expansive that has actually surprised me. It's not just all about George Washington and Frederick the Great. There's so much out there that needs to be learned, and needs to be discovered, and that's been a surprising and exciting part of this for me.
Hello listeners, this is Andrew. We often say that history is written by the victors, but on this show we know it's actually written by the supply lines, by the weather, and by the difficult decisions made inside the command tent. Sometimes the most interesting part of our recording session isn't the battle narrative. It's the 20-minute debate or analysis we have between the key actions. If you enjoy those what-if moments, I invite you to become part of the Prime and Load War Room on Patreon. For the price of a pint, you can hear the conversations that usually end up on the cutting room floor. You'll also get access to our newsletter, The Orderly Book, as well as exclusive bonus episodes that cover topics we typically don't get to on the main show. So if you're the kind of person who's looking for more 18th century warfare, join the Prime and Load War Room at patreon.com/primeandload. I'm not sure I can add much to that. I mean, I was thinking on the same lines when you posed the question. Some of the stuff that Josh was bringing out, you really don't think about Hawaii or Abyssinia or China. Certainly in my case, which probably just shows my ignorance of Asian history. In which case, I apologise, but they're not obvious topics when somebody says military history of the 18th century, and it was great to hear a bit about them, and hopefully we'll get some more of that. But Alex has done a sort of whistle stop of things we haven't covered yet, and there's so much there. Whether we even want to think about the end of the century and the 1790s into the French Revolution that we deliberately haven't covered as so far, because we kind of like Zach and his podcast and we don't tread on his toes, but there's an interesting no man's land that lies between what we've done so far and what he does that maybe we ought to colonise as well at the other end of the period. Look at some of the legacies of the sort of the high 18th century, as I like to call it, in the classic shiny Baroque bit in the middle.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think when we first started this, I thought the topics that kind of centralize around the American Revolution, it's the 250th. I thought that would kind of be our flagship episodes and topics. But I mean, it's like you said, there's so much stuff we can cover, and it seems like it's all gotten a lot of the same amount of interest. I mean, the American Revolution episodes have done well, but also the episodes about warfare around the world have done well. The episodes about Minden have done well. Fontenoy have done well. I thought the American Revolution would kind of be our much more of a gateway than it really has been. People are interested in all of it. And it doesn't seem to matter where the majority of our listeners come from. They're interested in stuff going on in Europe just as much as stuff going on in North America, which is really cool and exciting.
As we get into the AW anniversaries in earnest, with the Declaration of Independence and the armies really getting stuck into one another, I would imagine, I would hope that that's going to build. I mean, I make no secret it's not a war I know a huge amount about. I'm looking forward to learning more. I mean, I do feel a little bit that the anniversary theme that's stolen the thunder this year a little bit has been the Jacobites with all the stuff we've been doing with Aaron, which I think is a topic that's popular on both sides of the Atlantic, and has probably taken a little bit of that headline role for the beginning. But I'm sure once Washington and his merry men get into the field, then we'll see a shift.
Yeah, for sure. Has there been any conversations that have surprised you?
I mean, for me, and again, this is my ignorance of the American War of Independence. I'm on this huge learning curve through the project. I realise it's bread and butter to you two, but when we had Mark Kennedy on talking about I mean, we're primarily talking about reenactment, but talking about what I would think of as what was then the far west of the colonies. I had no idea that war had stretched that far. Simple as that. So that was a surprise and a new piece of information to me, even if it's bread and butter to you guys.
Yeah, I think mine would probably also be in the War of Independence. I mean, I've looked at what happened at Lexington and Concord many times throughout my life, and I lecture on it every year to undergraduate students, but like never in that, 2-hour and 45-minute level of granular detail before, with people who like walk the grounds and know the battlefield very intimately. I think that was something that there was. You found a lot of surprising stories in there. I really enjoyed that.
Just the sheer enthusiasm from those guys as well. I mean, that's people who love their jobs for sure. That was coming through all the way.
Yeah, definitely. I think one of the things that surprised me the most is just some of the intricate details about specific units that sometimes I take a backseat to the larger movements and strategy of certain things. I know, Andrew, the episode you talked about at Fontenoy, the Legion de Gresson with fur-lined uniforms kind of surprised me, and it was interesting. I ended up finding a period image of them, and they're an interesting looking bunch for sure. But I know we've also talked about the possibility of rifle armed Austrians as well in some of our episodes, and those little details often pop out in some of these episodes and really kind of they surprise me in places and battlefields I don't really normally think of, which is always super cool. But one day I know, Andrew, you were saying you want to make that kid up and take it on hopefully a whirlwind tour, which would be pretty great.
Yeah, well, it's actually my wife. It's Lucy's dream reenactment portrayal that we get a couple of Grassan outfits together and do some reenactment in those. But yeah, it's probably not the most practical gear for campaigning in. I suspect they got quite scruffy quite quickly. But yeah, it's definitely it's the bling outfit. I don't know if your reenactment on your side of the water has the culture of the beer tent, but certainly at the big multi-period events in the UK, people turn out in their finery. It's definitely beer tent kit, the Grassan uniform. Look it up if you're not familiar with it, but yeah, very, very, very shiny.
Awesome. And I guess this kind of goes with, we talked about stuff that surprises you. Has there been anything from any of our guests that have taught you something that you may not have known prior to the conversation with them?
Yeah, absolutely. I would say you're looking at Tom Golding and the Cartagena episode. I'm sort of broadly familiar with the story. Lawrence Washington, the Marines, and they go down, and it's a tough fight, and they all die of disease, and like the sort of the broad narrative of it. But like the level of detail and the geography that he sort of explained to us, I think, was something that I didn't know a ton about before, and I thought, amphibious warfare in the Caribbean in the 18th century, in like the relatively early 18th century, was something that I had not thought a lot about in the past, and really learned a lot about in that episode.
Yeah, so the crunch point and a lot of accounts of Cartagena do San Lazar in more detail than anything else, and mine's no different, but it is the most interesting tactical action, but it's also the point of you've sent a new army with relatively fresh officers, bad command and control, to a place to do a very difficult thing, and it's very rare that you see all of those things, those strategic and operational failures stack up and basically go wrong on a single night, and that is the Battle of San Lazar. So there's a big debate, and there's a lot's been written about this by Richard Harding, and I won't go into the whole thing. Basically, there's a huge debate between the army and the navy about how they deal with this fortress. So it's on a little teardrop-shaped hill. Teardrop runs north to south. You've got a square fort, and the kind of, I guess, the southwestern face, the face kind of closest to the British, that is pretty much a sheer cliff. And that's the kind of the flattest face of the fortress, and the rest folds round. The only entrance is actually directly opposite the city on the kind of eastern edge of it. If you buy the book, British Amphibious Warfare 1739 to 1815, edited by Andrew Bamford, you will find a very lovely map of Saint-Lazare drawn by yours truly, and it makes the point a lot clearer than I can in this with the medium of my voice. And basically, that fort is the point at which actually a French buccaneer attack had gone in pretty much 50 years before and taken it by storm. The Spanish are aware, and it's actually still there. So it might tell you that the Spanish think this is a closer run thing than the British might think it was, by the fact you can go to Cartagena now and you can go to Saint-Lazare, but it is now the center. The small fort they attack in 1741 is the centerpiece of a huge citadel. Basically, they dig up the entire hill that the fort is on and turn it into a defensive, like a Vauban-style fort. So it's a key linchpin of the city, and they know this at the time. So Desnaux, the engineer, he builds from the northern corner of the fort. They build a hornwork. So Fascines, Gambians, they build out this kind of mini bastion to hold troops. Around the northern edge of the wall, they dig some trenches, just to again either slow the British. Some of the accounts have them filled with water, some with troops. So it feels like there's more than one line of trenches. They then have on the sheer side of the hill, the side facing the British, they put a battery on either end of the wall to reinforce the bastion, and they dig even more trenches. So they've kind of they've actually been working on this since the British arrived. Basically, they turn up and Desnaux goes, the point of decision will be Saint-Lazare. We need to make sure that it is the toughest nut to crack that we can possibly make it. So the Spanish are turning this into an earthworked, reinforced position, as well as the fort itself. The fort itself is nothing particularly special. It mounts relatively few cannon, and like I said, it's held by 1 lieutenant and 26 guys. Itself, obviously, there are going to be troops in the trenches when we get to the battle. I think they put 300 men from the regiment de Aragon into the outer works. So 326 men. It's fairly formidable when you're behind trenches and all the rest of it. But like I say, from the kind of the 6th, the 7th, and the 8th of April, the British commanders have a debate. And it swings between Vernon saying, you need to storm this fortress, kind of Wellington style, ladders, grappling hooks, up and over, go and get them. And Wentworth and his men going, we really need a breach. We should try and do this properly. There is no reason, we're winning, let's not rush. Now, Vernon is terrified of the rains and yellow fever decimating the army. Again, not completely unreasonably. They're already suffering attrition through disease at this point, but Wentworth is much more cautious. And then Vernon at one point consents to try and form a breach, but says, well, you can't have any more men from the fleet to do that. You're going to have to do that on your own. Bearing in mind the men that Wentworth is asking for from the fleet are soldiers. They're not... they're not sailors he's asking for. He's asking for his own men, and Vernon is saying no. So the long and the short of it is, on the 8th of April, the British Army holds a council, and they agree to an escalade, so an attempt with ladders to try and storm the fort. John Guise, the guy I said is an eccentric art collector, he's the only one that goes, yes, sir, this is a great plan. Blakeney, who's the guy who defends Stirling Castle in Minorca, there are several accounts of him actually saying, I want my note of protest appended to the minutes from this meeting. I think this is a bloody terrible idea. We should have a breach. And sort of say, okay, understood, Colonel. Your opinion is valid. We're doing it anyway. And that's how you get to 1 a.m. on the 9th of April. What for us is probably closer to the 20th, 21st of April, because the British use a different calendar to the rest of Europe, because we're British, we have to be different. Nothing's changed. So the morning, 1 a.m. on the 9th of April, the British are going to launch an attack on Saint-Lazare. And like Andrew said earlier, this is kind of the force of the article I've written recently of how this goes badly wrong?
Yeah, I mean, I've talked about Josh and Mark there. I mean, another one that got me just for the level of detail that had been uncovered when we had Gabe Neville talking on about his research on the 8th Virginia. You know, to be able to track the personal stories down to that level and tie it into the wider history, I thought it was a fantastic bit of research that certainly taught me a lot.
So they were raised in the spring, the winter and spring of 1776. Some of the companies were carryovers from previous experiments in military organization of Virginia. In other words, converted minute battalions, converted, not battalions, minute companies, converted volunteer companies. A little bit hard to trace in most cases, but in some cases it's clear. Their rendezvous was in Suffolk, Virginia, which is a little town near Norfolk, in southeastern Virginia. Major General Charles Lee came to take command. Their first task was helping oust Lord Dunmore, the last royal governor of the last British governor of the colony. They did almost all of that. Just before that process was complete, Henry Clinton showed up with his with some soldiers, and there was a Admiral Peter Parker, or Commodore Peter Parker had, I think it was 3,000 redcoats on the way from Ireland. So Lee grabbed the regiment and raced south to Charleston to defend that. This was a source of great controversy because the regiment was not a continental regiment. It was a provincial regiment. Going to South Carolina was not their job by definition. And so you had a bunch of desertions. They were brought into the Continental Line during that summer. So they were at the Battle of Sullivan's Island. Then they were going to invade Florida. They didn't make it the whole way, but they did all catch malaria. A very large proportion of them died from malaria. Others were permanently incapacitated. There was no medicine for malaria other than Peruvian cinchona bark at the time. So all of them had chronic malaria for the rest of their lives. Peter Muhlenberg, his family said he died from it in 1806, I think is the year he died. Then they came north. They tried to refill their ranks. It was a challenge because the Rege Militaire had ended. People saw that, oh, wow, people die in war. I don't want to do that. Then battles like Couch's Bridge, Brandywine, Germantown, they go to Valley Forge. At the end of the Valley Forge encampment, their original 2-year enlistments end. So if they have not re-enlisted or if they were not later enlistments, they go home. That shrinks the regiment even further, and it is provisionally merged with 2 other regiments. So it is known for a while as the 4th, 8th, 12th Regiment. They fight as such at Monmouth. After that, they don't do a whole lot. There's not much going on in the north. Some of them participate in Stony Point and some other skirmishes up in the north. Then they go south for Charleston, the Siege of Charleston, and whoever's left is captured there. A few of them avoid capture there, and they continue to serve to the end of the war. But that is a high-level overview of this regiment's career.
As the non-PhD, I'm learning enormous amounts every time we talk to anybody. I think one of my favorite ones is when we talk to Dr. Sam Cavell about the naval stuff. That's a personal interest of mine, and naval stuff. I feel like kind of, we're not at the point of Nelson and the Napoleonic War Navy. So I feel like naval history kind of gets second fiddle to land warfare sometimes. So anytime we can do naval stuff and talk about, the war at sea, I always find that super interesting.
And this is what becomes the the thing that British sailors will die upon, right, is that what succeeded in the Napoleonic Wars and the French Revolution was rate of fire, right? We were accurate and we could just keep up that sustained rate of fire. And I mean, my gosh, this is a legacy that lives till Jutland, and probably has not very good implications for Jutland. But I think they're getting to that point during the American Revolutionary War. They're trying to learn the key elements of what it is that wins battles at sea, and they have a really mixed bag of efficacy here. I mean, most of the battles are indecisive. So being able to sort of say, oh, British superiority at sea, well, if that's the case, then even before you have your big Franco-Spanish combined fleets coming at you, then why are we looking at these indecisive battles? The Moonlight Battle in 1780 and all sorts of battles before that. Why are they so indecisive if we're that superior? And I think what we're also looking at technologically to help the British in terms of the speed and maneuverability of their ships and their efficacy in a battle is the whole technology of coppering, which is a new technology that the British are forced to adopt during the Revolutionary War, American Revolutionary War, because they need a force multiplier, right? Knowing that you've got the world's navies ranged against you, you're going to have to do something that immediately increases the effective number of ships that you have at sea at any given time. And so what do they reach for? They reach for this relatively untested new technology of coppering the bottoms of ships, knowing that it had problems. They knew, Sandwich, Middleton at the Navy Board knew that it had problems, but it doesn't matter. Whatever is going to basically give them more ships at sea at any given time, that's what we have to do. And how does it do this? Well, it keeps ships at sea longer because it stops their bottoms from becoming so fouled with barnacles and weed and all this stuff that had to be scraped off regularly. And if you were in tropical waters, well, then that stuff grew very quickly. So if the copper, which naturally sort of sheds itself in seawater, can keep the growth of all that stuff to a minimum, well, then you keep ships at sea longer and they remain faster and more maneuverable. That's a force multiplier. Now, they're also doing it to keep ships at sea because of things like shipworm, right? Shipworm will get into the hulls of a wooden ship and eat the hull literally to splinters over time. So they had to be constantly doing refits on these timber-clad hulls. But supposedly, coppering will mean that you don't need to do that as often because the copper protects the timber. And so you can keep those ships at sea longer without having to do regular refits. But that coppering ended up being a bit of a problem. By not examining the bottoms of these coppered ships, they created effectively a whole other series of problems for themselves. But in the moment, it was exactly what was needed. And help them to start winning battles. And many of the senior commanders credit the coppering with their ability to win in these fights.
Are there any other topics or moments that you kind of that stand out to you over this past year that you really enjoyed?
Yeah, some we really enjoyed. I had a wonderful conversation with my friend Dr. Tomasz Karpinski, who's a military archivist over in Poznan in Poland, on the Polish Army in the 18th century. I think that episode will be out soon. And it's just, again, you're familiar with the broad brushstrokes of Polish history, the winged hussars arrived at the Battle of Vienna and stuff like that. But really, what does it look like in the middle years of the 18th century? I mean, what does the logistics look like? What does the funding look like? How are the Poles trying to sort of emulate other armies? I mean, their army kind of looks like, a weird mashup between the Ottoman army and the Prussian army and the Russian army in some ways. And so just him telling that story and kind of learning a little bit about part of 18th century military history that I had not studied in any detail before. That was really enjoyable.
Actually, it's a very difficult question, because if you would like to compare Russian with Austrian or with Russian or with Saxon, all of this country have an army regulated a little bit different way. I can point out the weakness in the way that the Polish army have been constructed after the reform of 1770 at the beginning of the 18th century, which have decided that by the whole century, the army were weak because of this. What happened in this 1717?
I think for me, in terms of enjoyment, I mean, some of the times that we'd be able to be a little bit more lighthearted about things. I mean, the Halloween episode was great fun, even though there was some really serious content in there. But the generals bracket, the best commanders bracket. I mean, all right, my guy Marlborough won, so hurrah! It was it was fun to have a bit more of a laugh about things, whilst again still covering a lot of great history. But I mean, the interactive nature of that I thought was great as well. That we actually got people voting and even paying for votes in true 18th century fashion. That was a fun thing to do. I say we need to do the reverse, do a worst generals bracket, I think, and resurrect that fun at some point in the future.
One of the things I really enjoyed was we had Balkan Dave Watson on to talk about the Russian and Ottoman wars, and that's, like you said, Alex, there's so many different rooms to look in over this 100-year period, and I feel like that's one that I certainly have not looked at all, but it's this massive conflict that's happening both in scale, armies, distances. And that one, I really, really enjoyed that episode, that entire episode.
In the West, you've obviously got Austria pushing south, and although they're involved in these wars as well. So Austria was pushing back after the big Ottoman invasion. So the Balkans were taken over by the Ottoman Empire in late medieval period into the Renaissance. They were pushed back by the Austrians, predominantly Prince Eugene in the early period of the century. The Russians had a different objective. The Russians, essentially from Peter the Great's time, were pushing south, and their target was to reach the Black Sea. So they needed a port on the Black Sea in order to be able to dominate it. So their drive was that. The other reason was probably economic. These were fairly undeveloped lands. The Russians hate you talking about it being a colonial adventure, but if this is a colonial expansion, whatever they say. So essentially it was about developing, and we'll obviously later talk about amazing characters like Prince Potemkin, but they essentially were developing the economy of the area, but the Black Sea was crucial to their target.
If there's any topics that you think that we missed that we should have covered or you would have liked to hear more about, we've got a text the show link in the show notes and in the description below. Let us know. Again, there's a lot of 18th century. We're not planning on going anywhere, so let us know, because we can't cover things we don't know you want to hear about. I'd like to kind of turn our focus a little bit more towards our audience, because that's who we're making our episodes for. And we've got some stats to kind of see where our audience is coming from. What city do you think is most represented amongst our listeners? And I'll give you a hint. It is not a U.S. city.
Could it be London?
It is not London.
Okay. Is it in an English-speaking country?
It is. It is English-speaking.
Melbourne.
It is. It is Melbourne.
Are you serious?
I'm 100% serious.
Oh, get out. Okay, that's incredible.
Yep.
All
so
right.
our Australian listeners are really, they're pulling the weight. Our top three cities are Melbourne, Sydney, and then Chicago. We've got a pretty wide, I never in a million years would have guessed Melbourne would have been the city with the most Prime and Load listeners. I think that's pretty
incredible.
Awesome.
Well, yeah, we'll have to come up with some Australian content for our
we certainly will.
Yeah, need to redo the logo with a some Australian themed things, perhaps. Yeah.
A lot of our listeners have given us reviews, which have been awesome. We just want to call out a few of our really, really consistent viewers. We've got Jimmy from Remus, Michigan. I think Jimmy was one of the first people who sent us fan mail through our Buzzsprout host, which is really awesome. We've got Anthony from Souderton, PA. I'm probably saying that wrong, and then Robin from Norfolk. Robin actually left us a voice review, which is really awesome.
Hi, Prime and Load. This is Robin from Norfolk in England. I've been a listener, a subscriber to the podcast from the very start and really enjoy your content. It's scholarly, but not stuffy. It's informal, friendly, and there's humour. I like your deep dives into the more familiar aspects of 18th century warfare, but also the stuff that's completely new to me. So thanks again for a great podcast, and keep up the good work, chaps. Bye-bye.
Obviously, besides those three, we have a lot of people who have really supported the show, who have been very active with us through our Twitter account, as well as on our Patreon. But your support allows us to be able to do this. So we would just thank you all, to all of our listeners and to our entire audience, whether you're listening for free or you've subscribed to our Patreon. We really appreciate everything you guys have done for us. This is incredible. Hey everyone, this is Editor Lee, and I just wanted to take a second and thank a specific group of people. These are our Patreon members that are our plank holder tier. These are the 24 first people to sign up for our Patreon account when we first launched it. And we couldn't be more grateful to this group of people. So we just want to thank them all individually. Richard Williams, Mark Grindley, Joseph Kilted Diver 92 at gmail.com, Guy JC Wield at proton.com, Ryan Diamond, Mason Stallings, RN WKelp12 at gmail.com, Eric Sebastian, Mark Kennedy, Philip Cole, Jimmy Aldrich, Stefanovich Jadovsky, Hoplite 1963, Jim Getz, M. Cox, Andrew Wright, Roger Michaelides, Alexander Skufska, Brian Joy, Bryce Wittenberg, Brian Gugino, Jacob Petzold, and Robin Brashear. Once again, thank you guys very much for being with us from the very beginning.
So yeah, I mean, this is, it's been incredible to see the support. And I mean, we really, we certainly would not be doing this if it was not for this community of folks who finds this wonderful period of history very fascinating. So, incredible gratitude to our listeners and those who support us.
Yeah, I mean, you're going to have to make a Brit do the unthinkable and be all emotional here for a minute. But I mean, I've just been I've been overwhelmed by how well it's been received on certainly looking at the comments online and the way people are engaging with us and the figures that Lee's just trotted out, which are amazing. So yeah, thank you very much, everybody. It's really good to know it's not just our enthusiasm, but something that we share.
What's your vision for the show in this upcoming year?
I certainly wouldn't say no to more battles. No, in all seriousness, I do think that we have, looking forward, there's a lot of exciting topics. I mean, we're coming into a huge number of anniversaries. I as Andrew's kind of already teased, I'd like to see some more interactive stuff and maybe brackets again in our future. Just trying to find what's been successful, cover the things that listeners have enjoyed a bit more, whether that's the anniversaries, whether that's looking at sort of different armies, whether that's sort of branching out into new kind of time periods. I think one of the things that I did not really have on my radar or anticipate was how popular some of these series have been. I think particularly of the Jacobite series with Aaron Johnston and sort of how well that's done and how enjoyable that's been. I mean, I'd love to see. And certainly, you don't want to turn the whole show into a serial show where you have to listen to 20 episodes just to know what's going on. But I would love to see some other, maybe short series on particular wars or particular events in American and European history as we move forward into year 2.
Yeah, I mean, I'm certainly looking forward to the education I'm going to get with the AWI anniversaries coming up. We've also got some 1740s content again. I mean, my boy de Sax has been a bit quiet since Fontenoy, but we've got Raku and Lafelt coming up at the end of this year and into next. So we get the last of his great victories to follow through the anniversaries. I mean, just thinking about what I was saying about the interactive side of it. I mean, I'd love to do some more ask us questions episodes. Cover some of the little snippets that people find interesting that maybe never going to make a full episode, but we can combine to talk about a few different topics and cover them that way instead. So that'd be something I'd like to do some more of if we can fit it in amongst the vast amount of anniversaries. Having done a bit of brainstorming to work out the between the 270th, the 280th, the 285s, we've got a pretty full calendar for the rest of this year.
Yeah, I think we've talked about it and alluded to it a little bit, but I'd really like us to try and hopefully we can achieve getting into some more visual content as well. You know, some pairings to go with the shows, some maps, maybe if we're getting really bold, maybe even some animated maps or videos, things like that. We love doing the podcast, but like I think it was you, Alex, that was saying it's tough to describe troop movements over an audio only medium. So we're hoping maybe we can bridge that gap in this coming year, which would be really, really exciting. If there's topics you want to hear, we've got that text the show link in the description. By all means, reach out and let us know. And to close things off, what is most exciting for you moving forward?
I can be honest for a minute, just hanging with the lads, you know? I mean, I really enjoy the guest episodes, obviously, but it's a lot of fun to just sort of talk about this stuff among the three of us. And I think that Prime and Load is a fun podcast because you have folks who are, you know, bird-brained academics who are getting into the weeds, but you also, there's great love of this history and you know, sort of the nuts and bolts of the military side of things, which is frequently in academic work we don't always get to do. So it kind of brings two things together in the form of like the three of us. That's like in the heart of it that I'm looking forward to in this next year.
I don't think I can better that. That's an excellent summing up of what it means to me. I think as well. You know, I knew Alex before this. I've met a friend of Lee despite having never met him in person yet. Hopefully we'll put that right at some point. But yeah, absolutely, it's great just having a natter about something we all love and sharing it with a great audience.
Yeah, I wholeheartedly agree. I'm hoping and looking forward to growing the show some more so we can find those great Northern War experts out there, and we can find the people who want to hear about that stuff and really grow the show so we can have more interaction with more people and grow the interest and the awareness of this time period and its importance in the whole story of military history. I'm really hoping we can continue to grow at the same velocity we have over this past year. So I'm really excited for that.
That's it for this episode of Prime and Load. We hope you enjoyed it as much as we did. Don't forget to sign up for our free newsletter with a link in the description. It's the best way to stay up to date on the show, see what's coming up next, and ask us questions. You can also follow us on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter, formerly known as X. This episode was hosted by Drs. Alexander Burns and Andrew Bamford. It was produced by Lee Gugino, music by Brianna Tam, Artie Sun, and Adrian Berenegger. Prime and Load is a Historic Studios podcast.